Hi and welcome to another Rendaa Studios After Effects tutorial. I'm Mackenzie Criswell, and today we're going to be taking a look at two different motion graphics designs. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started in chronological order with the first design. Now, we're not going to be actually using a particle system inside of Cinema 4D, as if you've ever worked in a 3D program, you know everything you do adds on a noticeable amount of render time. What we're actually going to be doing is creating what's called a particle sprite. And that's basically where, in this instance, we use a video that loops as the particle for a particle system in After Effects. So if you've ever worked with particle systems, you know you have your object, most of the time a line or a circle, a feathered sphere, something like that, that emits over and over again. So instead of having 5,000 random lines emitting, we have a controlled number of actual textured videos emitting, and that is a really great way to just clone a bunch of stuff. We're going to actually be creating the particle system in After Effects. So all we're really doing in Cinema 4D is creating about a 10-second looping video, and that's of a blood cell just kind of spinning, and then we're going to randomly choose a frame and play from that point on using trap code particular. Alright, so to get started, we're going to obviously be using Cinema 4D, and we're going to use a 3D model that I got for free off of TurboSquid. There'll either be a direct download link on the Rendaa Studios website or a link to download that off of TurboSquid. But anyways, we'll go ahead and get started. You can either drag in the model file or choose File, Open, and then come over to your desktop and choose that file. And you can leave the scale the same, convert it if you want or whatever. And when you initially open it up, it gives you 4 different models, but for our purposes, we're only going to want to be keeping the last blood cell. The only other issue is that the anchor point on the model is messed up. It is in Cinema 4D. It's really easy to fix. You just click this little button right here, and then you can drag the anchor point wherever you want and completely reposition it. Deselect that button, come back to our regular tools, drag this into the center. Next, we'll go ahead and set up the camera. I like to have everything set up before I get started working. And I'll assume we're going to be working in a 720p comp, so 1000 by 1000 for the resolution should be good. We can set up the save. Okay, save as gibberish. And make sure you're using image type that supports alpha. PNG is a good one. That's relatively small and still pretty high quality. If you really want to be high quality, OpenEXR is what you should always use to render. It does support an alpha channel, you just have to make sure it's checked. But PNG is kind of a pretty good intermediate format that gives you relatively manageable file sizes. They're bigger than JPEG, but they're not extremely humongous. Next thing we want to do is center this up the way we want it to render. Of course, creating this camera and changing the position would be the most accurate way to do this, but if you hold down Alt and the left mouse button, you can kind of orbit around. Middle button will get you some panning or tracking, technically is what it's called. Zoom in some just with the mouse wheel. Let's see, Alt. Okay, that should be a pretty good starting distance. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so basically what we want to do is have this object spin around on every axis a full 360 degrees and then come back to its original position so that it will loop. And what we first need to do is go ahead and add some frames down here. So we'll add 240. That'll give us about 10 seconds at 24 FPS. And we're going to go ahead and create some keyframes. So click on this object, come over to coordinates, And we're going to click this little key. These zeros will be keyed at frame 0. And then we'll come down here and we can kind of rotate these to see what it does. So I'm just going to set this to 360. So they'll do one complete turn. Also, same thing here. 360. Perfect. And then we have this also just going to be 360. Then we'll go ahead and just key that and click all these. So now you can see what we have. Some very simple movement. If we hit the space bar, we can just play it back. Or we actually just have to hit play here. Last thing we want to do here in Cinema 4D is create a material for it. We can just use this one that's there by default. And we will make the color a very dark gray. The reason you don't want to use black is because whenever you use a fully black color on a texture like this, it shuts out the specular and doesn't really let in any light. So you're going to be just basically having a solid black image, which is not good at all. You put all this work into, well, somebody put all the work into putting this detail on the blood cell. So we can at least utilize it. And now if we click this render button up here, it'll go ahead and start rendering. Alright, so now that we have our particle sprite put together, we can go ahead and start on this particle simulation. So to get started, we'll create a fresh composition. Command N is the shortcut. Also, you can choose composition, new composition. And we'll give ourselves about, let's see, 10 seconds or so to work with. Don't need a lot of time. And 1280 by 720p. Alright, 24 frames per second. And we'll just call this blood cells. Okay, so here we have our composition ready to go. Let's see, do 50%. Alright, awesome. Let's go ahead and import that image sequence we created. If we double click here, it'll bring up a Finder window, and we can then import all those PNG images as an image sequence. So here we go. Hit up the desktop, come over here to render, and you can see here is our render created. And if we go ahead and just click this very first image, it'll automatically figure out that this is a PNG sequence and check by default to import the entire sequence. Alright, open that up. And we want to right click and choose interpret footage main. For whatever reason, After Effects likes to interpret footage at 30 frames per second. When I don't know if it's just me, but I'm almost always working at 24 frames a second. So you want to just go ahead and tell it to assume 24 FPS. And OK is down here off the screen, but whatever. Go ahead and drag this in. Okay, here's our render. And what we'll go ahead and do is just rename this object by hitting enter. And we'll rename it sprite. It's not a necessity. We're also going to go ahead and shut off the layer because it's going to just be a reference point. Next, we'll create a new layer, a new solid. And we'll name this particle sim. And we're going to be using particular. So drop that on there. And by default, it's going to just emit random dots. You probably know how this plugin works. What I want to do, however, come over to the emitter, and the particles per second, I'm going to set up to about 100 at the very first point. Keyframe, come to the very next frame, and change that to 0. And then what will happen is it'll emit 100 particles, and they will run their course and go away. We'll also set all the velocity settings to 0 from the default. Okay. Next up, particle. Make sure we have the life set to whatever so that it won't run out. Something so that it won't move. And actually, I'm going to change the type of emitter to a box emitter. That way we can control where the particles actually emit. So, okay, that's a lot of fun. Next, we're going to come back down to the particle, and we're going to choose Sprite. And under the texture option here, we'll choose our sprite texture. It's going to give us a warning that this is way too large. That's alright, we want it like that. We're going to go ahead and scale it up so that we have this image. We'll go ahead and put in a white background down here so that we have it the color we want. Next up, you can see it's just playing through our particle simulation, and that's not really what we want to be happening. So the way that we can fix that is by going into the particle simulation settings, and we're going to come down to the particle. We want to come to the sprite, and we want to choose mess with an option called time sampling. And what that does is controls what fraction of the video it's using. And what we want to do is choose random loop. So what that means is it's going to start from a random frame and then loop. And let's go ahead and adjust some of these emitter settings a little bit more. Not quite what we want. Let's see. Okay, we'll do that. Next up, we could actually colorize these cells a little bit, actually make them red blood cells if we wanted to. Let's see. We could kind of colorize these blood cells a little bit. Try to make them red blood cells instead of whatever they are currently. That might be cool. Let's see. Alright, that looks alright. And next up, we'll just do a really quick color grade to make this look a little bit better. Let's see, I like to pull the shadows up and bring down the midtones, on the highlights a touch. We'll give it a warmer tone, get a nice warm vibe. Let's see, do that. Okay. Also, I added a border in the original. That was pretty simple, just a black solid. We'll go ahead and just double click this mask and copy, paste it. Let's change the second to subtract, and I'm actually going to make a second copy of this entire layer. The first layer will come to the mask and choose expansion and just bring that down a little bit to create a nice border on the outside. The second, if we hit F, we can feather it out some to create a nice feathered kind of vintage look. That was the idea. Alrighty. And next, well actually last, we have our text to add. So very quickly we'll just add some text. Okay, and if you hit the apostrophe key, you can just bring up the title frame real quickly, center this, drag it below everything. That way the blood cells will just kind of move it out of the way. Solo this momentarily, and we'll get rid of that title. And what I did in the original was just kind of had it scaled down from 100 to about 90. I used turbulent displace to displace it kind of based randomly on stuff. I turned up the complexity a lot. Well, not that much. Let's see. Down to about there. And then just added a quick expression here. Oops. Alt click on that to add time times, say, 200. And then what we'll do is have this kind of start off the amount at 50, and then over about 2 seconds it'll fade to 0. So it'll be normal. And then we'll also hit T on the opacity, and we'll have it at 0 here, come in, and about here be full. Let me actually move that to 0 right here instead of 7. Okay, and if we take a look, we have a kind of elegant almost organic in its own sense title that looks very nice, but also kind of fits in with our living design, you might call it. So that is the first design. Pretty easy to set up. Mostly I just wanted to talk about creating these particle sprites and how to take a 3D object and actually use that in a particle simulation for After Effects. So it opens up a lot of possibilities once that idea is there. So hopefully you learned quite a bit from that, and we'll have some great ideas for how to use this. Alright, next up is our futuristic text. So I'm going to hit create a new comp, 1280 by 720, and let's get started. So first thing we want to do is set up a title mat. So let me explain. We're going to need to add a solid in the background that is black, and we need to do that because if we don't, it will still have alpha and it won't be able to calculate the luma values. So whatever is white is going to be picked up in the design, and whatever is black is not anything that's gray. The transparency will be calculated based upon how gray it is, based on how whether it's closer to white or black and how close to white or black it is. We're going to start basic though. We're just going to create some text. Okay, so at its simplest form, what's going to be happening is the Luma mat that we're going to be using to create the design is going to be picking up the white of the text and applying that through the design. If we were to, say, create a mask on this, and on the text layer, we were to create a mask around it and then feather it out, you'll see it kind of looks like it's fading away at the edges. And what you'll notice is that it's actually graying out towards the edge. So what would happen now is After Effects would see the white, and that would be at 100% in the design. But for the rest of the design, it's actually going to calculate these gray areas and calculate a certain percentage of opacity. So our entire design will not actually be at 100%. So with this map, we're going to pre-compose it, move all those attributes over there, and call this our title mat. Alright, so now that we have our title ready to go, we're going to start working on this design. So first thing we want to do, create a new layer, and we're going to put on an effect called grid. And at its very simplest form, it's just going to create a grid over the top of the image. That's what we want. We're going to make the grid quite a bit smaller, make the border about 1. And then what we're going to do is tell this image to use the Luma mat of title mat. So now you can see kind of what's happening. It's now using the mat to basically allow it to create the grid in certain places. First thing first, we can invert the grid. Rather than have it barely be showing up at all, we can have it fully in with a few weird kind of missing pieces. As we increase the border, we can have it eat away at itself in a cool, kind of not destructive way. You can also uninvert it and have it come in like that. Also a lot of fun. What else can we do? Obviously, just moving around the points on the grid is going to do all sorts of crazy awesome stuff. Okay, next we'll make a copy of our title mat, and what we're going to do here is do a bevel. And with our bevel, what we'll do is choose set mat, and let's see, if we set based on luminance, it'll basically just keep the area that is white, and then if we fill it with a black, we can then do a bevel alpha. Awesome. Brighten it up quite a bit. Put it up here in this corner. Make it about 1. Very small edge. And then if we hit add on top, it's just going to outline the text and make it a little bit clearer what it's saying. And we'll actually just set all of these to screen. Awesome. So here's where we actually get to start having a whole lot of fun. What we're going to do is make all of these 3D objects. And we're going to start making copies of the title mat. So, for example, here's our first copy. And we're going to simply push back another copy. And then lower the opacity a touch. Perhaps adjust the grid. Get a little bit of different look. Alright. Command C and V. Push it back further. T. Adjust the opacity. Booyah. And then push it back even further. So now we have a very interesting 3D look. Okay, so next with his design, we're going to add some background to the image. And the way we're going to do that is with another new solid layer, new solid, and we're going to use a pretty cool, I wouldn't quite call it a technique, but a cool idea I came up with a little while ago. And we're going to be using turbulent noise. We're going to switch the noise type from soft linear to block. That's going to create some blocks. You can play around with the fractal type. It'll just do some different stuff. Some of them look kind of cool. But what we really want to do, it has absolutely nothing to do with this actual image. This looks pretty bad for our purposes. But we're going to add on a cool effect called find edges. And if we invert it, you can see we have this very, very cool looking grid. Okay, so here's our background, and we'll drag it to the bottom, of course, below everything. And we'll hit T, make it pretty dim. Alright. And next we're going to select all of these layers here. And next for all these layers, we'll just hit position, keyframe the position, and then move them back in Z space a little bit. Right. Last but not least, we'll go ahead and add a color grade on this to just find and sell it. Again, I'm going to bring up the shadows quite a bit. Bring that up. Let's see here. And actually, let's colorize this a little bit. Let's add some red and yeah, give some red, and then we'll get rid of some of the blue. Get kind of a reddish orange feel. Add a touch of green there. And so now we've got some color to it. But anyways, this has been MAKC Criswell with Rendaa Studios. Hopefully you've learned quite a bit from this tutorial. Got a couple of great ideas to send you on your way, creating your own amazing motion graphic designs. Like I said, I'm MAKC Criswell for Rendaa Studios. If you like this tutorial, be sure to check out all their other ones. They're great. Except for the ones that I made. All the rest are great. Check them out.